Hello everyone. Today, as we had planned, we are going to take up Isha Upanishad. Well, in one of his writings, Sri Aurobindo remarked, Indians do not understand the Vedas at all. Europeans have systematized a gross misunderstanding of them. It's a very bold statement, very shocking one, because we are under the illusion that we know our Vedas. There have been many acharyas, gurus, saints who have interpreted the Vedas and the Upanishads for us. But Sri Aurobindo is of the view that Vedas are lost like the river Saraswati, somewhere under the ground, somewhere in the dark caverns. It's like a river that goes into the caverns, caves, dark caves, and is invisible to humankind. It's only sometimes this river comes to an open area, and that open country is what is called Upanishads. That means where it is visible, where it's a bit understandable to the human mind. So, catching upon that open area, open country, we have selected some beautiful places and built cities, he says. And those cities go by the name of Vedanta, Sankhya, Advaita, Dvaita, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and 100 different names. So you can understand now the comparison. Vedas are lost. So Upanishads are the only visible, understandable, if we can say, aspect of the Vedas. It's like, if you can get the image, like we have the Gangotri, the river, the Ganges that flows towards Bengal. And there suddenly it gets into tributaries. So these tributaries are the schools of thought, are these various schools, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, Advaita, name it, there are 100 names. So all these tributaries have separated from the Ganges. That's exactly what happened to the Vedas. We do not have the original unifying aspect of the Vedas, unifying teaching of the Vedas. We get them in piecemeal, in differences. But then the question is, why did it happen so? In fact, Sri Aurobindo in another essay writes, it is now several thousands of years since men ceased to study Veda and Upanishads for the sake of the Veda and the Upanishad. Why did we, Indians especially, lose this contact? Well, we have to get back into some history. We lost this contact, as said Sri Aurobindo, ever since the human mind in India, more and more intellectualized, always increasingly addicted to the secondary process of knowledge by logic and intellectual ratiocination. So you get the point there. So since the times the intellectualization, rationalization came into the Indian mind, then we lost touch with the Vedas. Because as is the nature of the intellectual or the mental consciousness, it divides. It never sees a unified image. It's only if there is a direct knowledge by experience or perception, we get the original vision. But reason and mind, they are prone to divide the truth. So it happened in India that Upanishad itself was reflecting the unity, the consciousness of oneness of the Vedas. But from the Upanishads, there grew up these tributaries, and all of them, they began to dislocate and dismember the many-sided harmony of ancient Vedic truth. Sri Aurobindo uses a very strong word, dislocate and dismember. So this is the tragedy. In fact, at a point he says, it's a national loss. We have forgotten our Vedas. We may revere them, saying we have 4 Vedas and all the great lectures we may give on them. But we have lost the truth. The truth of a harmonious vision of unity. So that's the reason Sri Aurobindo would tell us that now Vedas have become more or less like the Egyptian hieroglyphics. We have got them more as, exhibition pieces, more to say that we have the greatest original knowledge, wisdom of the world, but we do not know what it is. That's the tragedy. But there is a point there, because why is it that we could not understand? As I told you, we have developed the intellectual rational capacity, and we are trying to understand something which is beyond the mind, beyond the intellect. And whereas because the Upanishads and the Vedas have been developed by an actual tangible experience of the spirit. So what is experiential, we are turning it into a rational intellectual approach. They do not match. So if we have to understand the Upanishads or the Vedas, we have to use the right method, the right instrumentation. That's the direct spiritual experience. Without that, people have tried it, but they've all failed to a certain extent. But in a way, if you want to explain why it happened in India, there are other writings in Sri Aurobindo where he says there has been a devolution. Devolution means a process that comes from the Unitarian to the multiple, from the oneness to the multiple. So this process was inevitable in Indian spiritual history. I use the word inevitable because this is how spirituality grows. It evolves. It doesn't stay always on the heights. It comes down to different levels. From the great levels of revelations of the Vedas, we have inspirations, intuitions from the Upanishads. And then we have the reason of the schools of thought. And that's why we have seen all the schools of thought, they specialize on one aspect. Sankhya and Vedanta and with this and that. It's a specialization. Today what we call specialization in medical field, it began long back in our spirituality. We started specializing knowledge. That's how we have got different yoga systems. We have Raja Yoga, or this yoga, that yoga, Bhakti Yoga. These are all specializations. So that was the spirit, and this was bound to happen, and it was necessary to happen that we enter into a specialization, because after all, the mind too must catch the spiritual truth. Remember that. So in one way it's a loss, but if you look at it differently, which again Sri Aurobindo himself tells us, it was inevitable that the Vedic truth comes down to the levels of the mind, comes down to the levels of the body, comes down to the levels of the emotions, and ultimately reaches the physical. So there is a devolutionary process which was inevitable and necessary in the process of evolution. But however, sum and substance, we have lost the Vedas, and because of this devolution of intellect. And now we see that this Upanishads, Sri Aurobindo would call the Vedas as divinely inspired words and rhythms. These truths of the Vedas have been reconnected, relived. But remember the word relived and re-experienced by the Vedic rishis, by the Upanishad rishis. They did not read the Vedas and understand and write a commentary. As we said, all the Vedic truths have to be re-experienced. And that was the thing that the Upanishadic rishis did. They re-experienced the Vedic truths and then brought them down into a different language. The only difference between Vedas and Upanishads is the use of the language. Vedic language is very symbolic, difficult for the moderns to comprehend, but Upanishads is not so. It is metaphysical language. The language has differed. At the same time, it is very difficult to understand the Upanishads without the experience, but at least it's not as symbolic. A lot of images that were used in Vedas are not so in Upanishads. So Sri Aurobindo gives the Upanishads a high place. He says, not only monism, I'm reading out a sentence from Sri Aurobindo, please give it a concentrated hearing. Very important. Not only monism, but all the philosophical thoughts and doctrines that have come into being in Europe and Asia, rationalism, realism, nihilism, the Darwinian theory of evolution, the positivism of Kant, the philosophy of Hegel, Kant, Spinoza, Schopenhauer, utilitarianism, hedonism, all were seen and expressed by the rishis endowed with direct vision. And I'm sure Sri Aurobindo knew what he was writing. It's not because he wanted to praise the Upanishads. He knew very well all those persons here whom he has named. He knew all of them. So what does it mean? That these Upanishadic rishis, they had a direct experience of all these philosophies that have come out now in Europe or in Asia. It's amazing to see that really the wisdom of the world, the knowledge, the philosophy, the wisdom, it has been all inspired by, directly or indirectly, known or unknown, by the Upanishads. So you will see why we claim all the time that India is the land of wisdom. Obviously it is. There have been many researches in the modern times, in the present decades actually, where people have found out the inspiration behind the philosophy of Hegel and Kant and Spinoza and etc. And all of them we see they have been at one point or the other inspired by the Upanishads. They have read the Upanishads and taken some ideas from them and borrowed these ideas and developed differently. So that is the beauty of the Upanishads. Is really the fountainhead of human knowledge and wisdom. Well, to go back into history, as we know, there are 4 Vedas. But each of these 4 Vedas has 4 parts. They are called the Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. These are the 4 parts of each Veda. And these Upanishads are totally found to be around 200. But 108 are really known to the modern kind. Out of those 108, 10 are the most important ones, on which many scholars, and Sri Aurobindo also has commented on this 10, not profusely, but on some of them he has commented more and others less. What are the 10? Isha, Kena, Katha, Prashna, Mundaka, Mandukya, Taittiriya, Artreya, Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka. Brihadaranyaka is the longest one, and Mandukya is the shortest one with only 12 verses. After Mandukya comes Isha with 18 verses. And there we have a wonderful synopsis of all the Upanishads. But first of all, let me go back and clarify the meaning of Upanishad itself. Normally, if you see the word itself, it is to sit nearby and listen to your guru, listen to your master. It's sitting nearby. But that is the linguistic meaning. But philosophically, it means to enter into a secret place. It's sitting near devotedly for listening to a secret teaching. So that's what is the Upanishad. It's to enter into a secret place. That's the essential meaning. Because if you have read, some of you who have read, you will see the story of Narad. Narad goes to Rishi Sanat Kumara and he says, teach me knowledge, by knowing which I'll get out of all this sorrow and suffering. You see, Narad too had his own problems. So he comes to Sanat Kumara and says, can you help me by teaching that knowledge which takes me out of this? Then Sanat Kumara asks him, Narad, first tell me what is it that you know? And Narad was a great Pandit. He enumerates 64 kinds of branches of knowledge. Philosophy and psychology and arts and this and that. It's a long list. 64 is a long list. Sanat Kumara patiently hears all this long list and says, oh Narad, what you know is only names of things. You do not know the essence. You may know all this architecture or poetry or philosophy. These are all names. There is no substance in what you know. Then Narad says, that's why Rishi Sanat Kumara, I've come to you. So there he says, you have got to gain a direct vision of that knowledge by experience, by sadhana, by yoga. So that is the main lesson that we see from the Upanishads, that you have to learn the secrets of this universe by yoga, by experience. And then unless and until by this yoga you secure the key, that means you find out by a key. What is that key? Is the experience of the divine. In fact, Sri Aurobindo has a beautiful line in Savitri, our life is a paradox with God for the key. So now this is the line which says that the whole key of this wisdom or higher knowledge is first of all the experience of the divine. So Sanat Kumara tells him how to do this sadhana and yoga. So this is a beautiful lesson where we see that we cannot understand things, explore things by mind, by arguments, by discussions, by commentaries. It's all verbal, it's all vocal, it's all oral. So we see that this vision is to be gotten by experience. In fact, Sri Aurobindo has a very beautiful image here. Any attempt to discover the meaning of the Upanishads by argument alone is equivalent to investigating a dense forest with a lighted candle from high treetops. Direct vision is the sunlight which illumines the entire forest, making it visible to the seeker. A beautiful image indeed. So what we are doing is taking these candle lights and trying to find out what there is in the forest. So this is the essence of Upanishads. It teaches you how to bring about the sunlight itself, by which you will know the secrets of this matter. Now coming directly to Sri Aurobindo's volume, here is what is the Upanishads. At least we have in CWSA collected volumes of Sri Aurobindo, volume 17, which is called Isha Upanishad. And here, this book has got two parts. The first part has a lot of commentaries, is a final translation and analysis of the Isha Upanishads. The first part is the one that was published during the lifetime of Sri Aurobindo. That's what is important. During his own lifetime, he revised it and he gave for publication, the first part. And the second part was not published during his lifetime, but it has got 10 incomplete commentaries on the Isha Upanishads. These were written between 1900 and 1914. I think you remember the time. 1914 is the time when we started the 15 next year is the Arya period. So before he took up the Arya, he wrote 10 commentaries. So that itself shows, you see, these commentaries on Isha Upanishads, there are about 600 pages. Why did he do that? He went on improving one upon the other his own commentaries, and then finally in the Arya, he takes up the final interpretation. He has not written any other Upanishad such a long commentary. So obviously, Isha has been held very, very important for Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. Now, what does it mean? We'll see directly about the Isha. Now, this was the background. Now, what does Isha hold, and why does Isha hold? Is it held by Sri Aurobindo so very important? For two reasons. Very simple. One is, in one of the commentaries, he himself writes, he gives a new name to Isha Upanishad, saying the life divine. And what I want to tell you is, before he took up in the Arya the book The Life Divine, he wrote a commentary on Isha Upanishad and called it The Life Divine. So that itself gives us a hint that there are thoughts and ideas which he would further develop in the book The Life Divine, which he found out in the Isha Upanishad itself. Why? What are those ideas? Well, there may be many ideas, but the most important thing is what the Life Divine presents about the integral life. So he says, this integral life or integral yoga, which he was to develop in the synthesis of yoga and in the Life Divine later, he finds its key ideas in the Upanishads itself. Of course, we did say that the Life Divine is fact, experience. That's what Sri Aurobindo himself said. So this is again what we're trying to understand, that Isha Upanishad is also a kind of an experience that Sri Aurobindo himself had. But this experience gets formulated in the Life Divine. So he wrote so many commentaries trying to formulate their new vision. So to come back, what are the most important things about the Isha Upanishad? One is integral yoga. You may be surprised to see how come there is integral yoga in Isha Upanishad. Well, that's what is most important to understand. Because he says this notion of integral yoga is not something new. It is based upon a spiritual knowledge more integral. It is based upon the burning experience of the divine reality in the soul, life and mind and heart and body. This is not a new discovery, but old and indeed eternal. So friends, we understand one more thing. We have spoken about integral yoga, integral philosophy, integral ideas, etc. But these have been as ancient and indeed eternal. Because this idea of the integral life or philosophy was there right in the Vedas. It's not something that Sri Aurobindo has given us anew. He has brought it back from the times of the Vedas. He has reconnected himself to this integral vision of life of the Vedas and the Upanishads. In the Upanishads, the emphasis is on this integration, is on the reconciliation of the pairs of opposites. These are these 18 verses, but they deal with about 9 opposites. What are they? The conscious Lord and phenomenal nature. Number 2, renunciation and enjoyment. Action in nature and freedom in the soul. The one stable Brahman and the multiple movement. Being and becoming. the active Lord and the indifferent Akshara Brahman, Vidya and Avidya, birth and non-birth, works and knowledge. You see, these have been the eternal opposites. But remember, these opposites have been synthesized, reconciled for the first time very clearly and briefly. Just imagine these 9 points, each of them getting hardly 2 verses. There are 18 verses, remember. In just 2 verses, the way that the Upanishads, they synthesize these beautiful oppositions and make them into Unitarian vision. What does it mean? That the Upanishads are bringing back a synthesis that was the foundation of the Vedas. And to give you an example, you can read that in the first book itself, you will see a synthesis. Just to give you one example, take that opposition of Vidya and Avidya, which has been used mostly by these gurus, by some teachers and acharyas. They have separated this Vidya and Avidya. So they have thrown Avidya into humanity and said, you people are in ignorance. We are all in ignorance and therefore to be condemned. So the divine, the spirituality, the spiritual level is of Vidya. So from Avidya we have to go to Vidya, from ignorance to knowledge. So there has been this kind of a bifurcation. But Upanishads no. Upanishads say there is no bifurcation. This Vidya and Avidya are both the stances of the one single Brahman consciousness. What does it mean? That is, when we are focusing upon the oneness of the divine, when we focus upon being, that is Vidya. When we focus upon becoming, that is Avidya. But why should it be something derogatory? Because the Upanishads themselves tell us that Avidya is accepted by the Lord in the mind in order to develop individual relations to their utmost in all the possibilities of division. You see, the word Avidya and Vidya, they have this connotation. Avidya is without knowledge, but it does not mean ignorant. Avidya means only partial knowledge. Avidya is focused knowledge, if you want to know that. So Vidya is totality of knowledge, whereas Avidya is focused knowledge. And this focused knowledge is obviously important. When we as individuals, when we sit on a computer and try to understand something, we have to focus on that point. We cannot be having a consciousness of what is in my room, who is coming into my room, etc., etc. So this focused knowledge is necessary, and that is called Avidya. So Upanishads tell us it is to develop individual relations to their utmost in all their possibilities of division and its consequences, that there is a need of Avidya. So now we understand Vidya is as much needed as Avidya, and Avidya is as much needed as Vidya. They cannot be followed exclusively, because we need to focus on the individual. So the divine, when he wanted to focus on the individual, he became Avidya himself. The consciousness became Avidya. That means the large cosmic consciousness focused at a single point because it wanted to get into the individual, that is you and me. So what's wrong in that? So we see that Upanishad tells us that both Avidya and Vidya are necessary, and there are beautiful verses on that which we can develop later if we have time. So that is one example of the synthesis, how it brought saying that both Vidya and Avidya are necessary. Similarly, they talk about being and becoming, renunciation and enjoyment, etc. Now, having given you that example, now I'll take you to the verse. The first, that integration is given in the very first and second verses. All this is for habitation by the Lord. Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam. All this is for the habitation by the Lord. Whosoever is individual universe of movement in the universal motion, by that renounced thou shouldst enjoy, lust not after any man's possession. I'll just read out the verse, I'll come back to it later. That's the first verse, which is crucial for Sri Aurobindo. You see, there are nine others points of synthesis, like we said, Vidya, becoming, being, etc. But the very first verse is really the essence of the Isha Upanishad itself. So you see, there's a whole trajectory from the Vedas, which is the Upanishads. Out of the Upanishads, Isha Upanishad is the most important one. And out of the 18 verses of the Upanishads, we have the first verse, which is a magnificent thing. And Sri Aurobindo calls it, Isha Upanishads opens with a monumental phrase. Look at the phrase. A monumental phrase in which 8 brief and sufficient words, 2 supreme terms of existence are confronted and set forth in their real and eternal relation. So this monumental phrase, 8 brief and sufficient words, are this first one, Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam Jagatyam Jagat. What does it mean? So that's the first verse, which is most important for Sri Aurobindo, maybe for others too. There's another verse, which is again of great importance to Sri Aurobindo's philosophy and yoga. What is it? The face of truth. That's verse number 15, Isha Upanishad. The face of truth is covered with a brilliant lid. That do thou remove, O fosterer, for the law of the truth, for sight. So verse 1, verse 15. These form the essential, most important verses for Sri Aurobindo. I'm all the time telling you for Sri Aurobindo. Because the first verse gives you the essence of an integration. 15th verse brings in the concept of supermind, the Surya, what he calls here, the brilliant, the face of truth is covered with a brilliant golden lid. The face of truth is nothing but supermind. I'll come to that and explain a little more. Now the very first verse, Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagat. Now here, the very first word Isha, of course we know the Sanskrit translation, is the master or the Lord. But what is this word? It says Isha Vasyamidam Yatkin Jagat. The word that is wedded to, it says, is Isha Vasyamidam, we have this habitation. Everything that is for habitation by the Lord. All this is for the habitation by the Lord. What is this, all this? Now these are the two things. Isha, the Lord, is inhabiting something. What? So Isha, he says, it is habiting, it is enveloping, it is covering all that is in movement. That is to say, that the Eternal is seated soul in all his creatures, and the ever-shifting universe and its innumerable worlds and knots of motion, each of them called by us an object, in all of which one Lord is multitudinously the inhabitant. So this is the mystery that I would like to deal in greater detail. That the divine, the Isha, the Lord, is inhabiting every object, every whirl and knot of motion. Now what is this whirl and knot of motion? How did it come about? The word comes from Jagat. So he's saying that the Lord is inhabiting the Jagat. And what is Jagat? Well, Jagat is something that moves. So that is why he says that there is the name, from there the word Jagati comes, which is the name for earth, Prithvi, and afterwards for the whole wide universe, of which the earth with which we alone know it is concerned. So Jagati, Jagat is that all that moves. So now put it together, that the Isha, the Supreme Lord, is inhabiting all things that are moving. That's the meaning. And what are those things that are moving? They are the objects. They are the creations in this world. So you see, in this universe, everything moves. Everything is in motion. And that's extremely important to see how the Upanishadic rishis, they found out a scientific truth which has come to be known to humanity only now, saying that matter is energy. That we have found out a couple of 100 years ago. But the very name, Isha says, Jagat or Jagati, means all that is in motion. So motion is another name for Prakriti. So this is where we see that Prakriti's essential characteristic is motion. And for by motion she creates this material world, and indeed all object matter is only a form, that is to say, visible, audible or sensible result of motion. So if you look at it from scientific point of view also, that all this creation is done by energy. So when the scientists told us that even matter is in motion, there are these subatomic things which are constantly, eternally in movement. So what do they say ultimately? That is energy. That is in motion. And that is the truth that Isha Upanishad revealed to us thousands of years back. So now, friends, we will see that the very first word synthesizes these two things, Isha and Jagati or Jagat. That means the Lord and the world that is in movement. It is not a static world. It is something that is in movement. Now go back to other philosophic terms. Isha is the Lord, is the Supreme, is the Purusha. And then this Jagati, Prakriti, is Shakti. So now we come into the philosophic terms that there is this universal consciousness and Shakti. So this is this ultimate synthesis we see, that there is the question of consciousness wedded to Shakti. So it is not that the Shakti is separate from consciousness. It is the Lord is inhabiting all that is there in this Shakti aspect, all that is known as objects. So you can see an absolute oneness. There is no division. We do not say consciousness is Lord and Prakriti is Jada, is ignorant, is avidya, so shun it. We cannot. It is not Purusha and Prakriti. It is Purusha. Prakriti is a Purusha and Purusha is in Prakriti. So it is a kind of, there is no Purusha, there is no Prakriti separate from Purusha. Purusha is enveloping. It's like we telling that there is ether around this object. So ether is in an object, is around an object, is above an object, is inside an object, everywhere. So similarly, that Isha, the Lord, is there everywhere in this world. It is the Shakti aspect, the dynamic aspect, but it is He who is enveloping. You can see here why I said it is important for Sri Aurobindo. Because it is here that unfortunately that the later scholars have really brought a division, and there they said that we have to have an importance and division between the world, enjoyment, action, many, birth and ignorance, and the opposite is good is God, renunciation, quietism, the one, cessation of birth, the knowledge, etc. What I mean is that later the scholars, they gave importance to the God concept, to the knowledge concept, to the non-birth concept, and all that is in motion and movement they rejected as saying false and ignorant. And this division became so strong, and the division became so wide, that ultimately what happened? That in India, more and more people became ascetics. If not ascetics really taking sannyasahood, at least mentally, psychologically, they started believing that only the heavens, only the God, only the divine knowledge, only the cessation of birth, only that salvation, only that mukti, liberation, they are important. You see, the whole ideal changed. They said liberation is important, this ignorant living is not right. And Sri Aurobindo kind of gives you a very sad note to tell us that this division became so wide that ultimately we had to have an inevitable division where it says this world is an illusion. You see the line of argument? That we started emphasizing upon the God cessation of birth so much so that the only idea was that this creation is an illusion. And the only thing is to cast it aside as soon as possible. This is what you should understand philosophically, the importance of the Vedas and the Upanishads. The Upanishads combine them, synthesize them together, but afterwards the tributary schools, even the great acharyas, everyone went about saying the salvation, liberation, and one of them even said, this world is an illusion, get rid of it. So this was the ultimate loss. Why? Later on, as Sri Aurobindo would explain, India's genius on the social level, individual level, vital level, mental level, everything became so weak because of this single division of philosophy. So do not think that India became weak and we had all these foreign invasions. It did not have invasions long back when India was strong with this philosophy of oneness. It's only later, when this philosophy divided the country and made it weak, that then we had foreign invasions. So that is the inner secret of the invasions by Muslims and others. Now I come directly to one more point that is there in the verse itself. He says, but that renounce thou shouldst enjoy, lust not after any man's possession. That's another combination, another synthesis. Because we have seen, I'm not naming the person, but there are philosophers who said, if we want to enjoy this world, renounce it. He says, we cannot enjoy this world, renunciation is the only ideal. But the Upanishads tell us very bluntly that thou shouldst enjoy this world. There's nothing wrong in this enjoyment. So he says, enjoy this world. How to enjoy that? By renunciation. So, that renounce thou shouldst enjoy. So this is a beautiful thing. You see, Upanishads is not asking us to leave the world, leave this outer world. In fact, it says you must have a fullness of life. And yet the secret is, you can enjoy the world by renouncing it. In fact, when I was reading this sentence, I remembered my MA classes when I used to read Eliot. We have this 4 quartets. Since that time this line was in my mind, that in order to possess What you do not possess, you must go by the way of dispossession. He had also read this Upanishads. T.S. Eliot had read the Upanishads. He had caught some of these main ideas. But this is the same idea, that you can enjoy this world by renouncing it. This is the whole factor. That is, now how do you enjoy? As Sri Aurobindo himself says, it will yet say that it tells us next, by abandonment of this, to enjoy and not to covet any man's wealth. This is a paradox. That somebody says, the other person is so rich, he is enjoying so much wealth, and I am so poor. How can I also enjoy when he is so poor, so rich? So there is a tussle, and this difference is what is at the base of all our social differences. We have jealousies, we have violence, we have all that, because we had this question of I too want to enjoy, whereas I am not allowed to enjoy because the other person is snatching away my wealth and my comfort. The solution that Isha tells us is that if you believe, that you have to begin to believe that all this is verily the Brahman, in the sense that what is within me is the Supreme Lord. What is within you is the Supreme Lord. So actually it's only our forms that differ. Otherwise we are one same consciousness. So this is the essence of the Vedanta, that all forms are inhabited by the same Supreme Lord. That's the first verse, Isha Vasamidam Sarvam Jagatyam Jagat. So Sri Aurobindo is also emphasizing that unless and until we have this consciousness of the one divine in all forms, this struggle of existence will remain. And of course, you will ask the question, is it possible? Well, he says yes. Until we have this consciousness, we will suffer. There is no solution. And a very interesting note I read in Sri Aurobindo's writing, in his own writings in 1949, he wrote in a letter clarifying, "For me all is Brahman, and I find the divine everywhere." So he is not preaching something that he hasn't experienced. He himself says, "For me all is Brahman, and I find divine everywhere." This is pure Vedanta. It is such a man, such a consciousness, which cannot suffer, which will not see division, which will not see any kind of injustice, because for him, he says the Brahman is within me, Brahman is within you. So that is an absolute experiential thing with Sri Aurobindo. It's not philosophy, it's not trying to justify the Isha Upanishad. So this is the first verse. I'll take you to the second verse in brief, where we see this question of the, the verse 16, where it says, "The face of truth is covered with a brilliant golden lid." Now this face of truth is nothing but the Surya, the sun, representing the supramental consciousness. So the Upanishad Rishis had glimpsed the supermind, the world of the supermind. But they said, this world of supermind is covered by this, what it says, covered with a brilliant golden lid. That do thou remove. So there is a lid separating the supermind and our world. What is that lid? Well, those of you who have read a bit of Sri Aurobindo, you know, it's the lid of the overmental consciousness. So between the supermind and this mind, there's a division. The division is of overmind. So what it means is simply this, that humanity has evolved itself, not the humanity in general, but some human beings have gone to the level of the overmind. But the Upanishadic Rishis tell us that we know that beyond there is a new world called the supermind, but we are not able to enter that. But that is an idea, that is a concept, that's a realization that Sri Aurobindo had. He breaks through this overmental lid and goes into the world of the supermind and brings it down. That is the contribution that Sri Aurobindo made in his Yoga Tapasya. He has made as an avatar of the supermind. He brings down that world which was perceived by the Vedic and Upanishadic seers. That's why he says, remove that world, remove that lid. And then there is another beautiful image there. The last verse of the Upanishad, O Agni, O God Agni, knowing all things that are manifested, lead us by the good path to the felicity. Remove from us the devious attraction of sin. To thee, completest speech of submission, we would dispose. Well, much to be said, but there's only one concept I'd like to emphasize on. This question of the Agni. So there's a combination of Surya and Agni. He says, if Surya is invoked to bring about the necessary inner illumination, Agni is likewise invoked to back knowledge with the will to right action, for knowledge is incomplete without action. So friend, this is the combination again, knowledge and will. Surya is that knowledge and Agni is that willpower, is that right action. What does it mean? It's not sufficient to have knowledge and wisdom and supramental consciousness. We must be able to bring it into action, into life, into manifestation, for which Agni is required. Agni is that aspiration, Agni is that will, Agni is that power. So in this Upanishad, Sri Aurobindo found this solution which he himself was looking for. And this combination of knowledge and will is there perfectly in the supermind. It is not to be found below the level of supermind. Below the level of supermind, we have either knowledge or will, but both of them together equally is found only on the supramental level. So I can understand why Sri Aurobindo gave such great importance to Isha Upanishads, because it's in one place we have two major pillar ideas of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. That is the synthesis of the consciousness with Shakti, the synthesis of Lord with Shakti, and the supramental consciousness. And because of this, now after seeing all this, you should be able to gauge for yourselves what has been the contribution that Sri Aurobindo has made to the world consciousness, not only on the level of ideas, but as an avatar of the supramental consciousness, he has contributed to the world a new vision, a new possibility, a new force. And philosophically seeing, Sri Aurobindo has thus reconnected us, the modern times, to the Vedic and the Upanishadic times. In between there have been all the tributaries, some of them brilliant, marvelous. Each Acharya is extraordinary in himself. But there have all been tributaries. There have been partial knowledges. None of them have been as comprehensible, as integral as the Vedas and the Upanishads. So for the first time, after eons of separation, we see in Sri Aurobindo once again all these tributaries coming to the Bay of Bengal and uniting themselves in that bay, in that ocean. So that ocean is Sri Aurobindo once again, where all knowledge, all the tributaries, they get back into Sri Aurobindo. That is why in Sri Aurobindo's yoga and philosophy, you have synthesis, you have Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, we have Tantra, we have Vedanta, we have Shakti. All these tributaries, they come back and they get united in Sri Aurobindo. So Sri Aurobindo is that great synthesis once again. He has been a great synthesis of the Upanishads, of the schools, of Bhagavad Gita, everything. And that also is one more thing we should understand, that not only philosophically is a synthesis, but experientially also. He has had experiences of all the tributaries. Be it the Shankaracharya, be it Ramanujacharya, be it Bhagavad Gita, be it Ramakrishna, all these experiences have been given to him. He has attained them. So Sri Aurobindo is that repository of the experiences of Indian tributaries, spiritual tributaries, as well as Indian philosophies. So this is the grand master, is the grand synthesis. So now, friends, you understand why I have taken you through all these books, and now Isha comes again, Upanishads comes again as the great synthesis, but Sri Aurobindo is again the person who has brought into himself experientially and as knowledge and experience and explanation, the entire Upanishads has come back. All the 108 or all the 10 Upanishads, the saramsh, the essential, the quintessence is found in Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine and his books are Savitri, etc. So we have here a great fulfillment. I mean, with all due respect, with all the acharyas, mankind is lucky, is fortunate that we have somebody in Sri Aurobindo who has given to us in a language that is comprehensible to all of us in the language of English. Not that we can all understand, but at least it is not a sacred and secret language of Sanskrit, which the West does not understand. But we are really grateful to Sri Aurobindo and the Mother that they have taken the trouble. They need not have, Sri Aurobindo need not have written at all. In fact, he has taken the trouble to write so many volumes. As we know, there are 35 volumes. Well, in his times, there were not so many volumes. There were Arya volumes, 7 to 10 volumes. One of the disciples asked, it seems, Sri Aurobindo, that why did you stop writing in the Arya? You could have written more. He replied saying that I could have written 70 times more than what I have written. But first try to understand what I have written in these 7 volumes itself. So his knowledge is an immense ocean. He could have flooded us with greater knowledge, but we are struggling to understand even these 7 books. It may take us generations, times, decades to understand even this. But that's why we feel grateful. We feel, as a disciple feels tremendously humble that here is a master, a guru, a spiritual master, at whose feet we really bow down and say, "O Lord, we offer all our gratitude to you, for you have shown us the path, you have given us the hope, you have given us the vision of the future." Well, that's the sum and substance and the importance of Isha Upanishad. This makes one big section that has been, as I told you, the first 4 books was individual experience. Then the Isha Upanishads and the Veda has been extended experience. But then the next 2 talks, the last 2 talks, would be kind of the outer aspect of Sri Aurobindo's personality, the human cycle and the ideal of human unity. Because remember, Sri Aurobindo was not just living for himself. He had experienced all that not for himself. He was also looking on the transformation of society, transformation of humanity. So the next step is of the level of society, and the last book, Ideal of Human Unity, is the level of humanity itself. So that is how we'll get a complete integral picture of Sri Aurobindo as a personality, as a person, and his works. Thank you. I suppose this abstract thing I've given you a little bit an opening to understand. Thank you so much.